All right, well, hello everybody. Welcome to the last Captive Thoughts episode of the year. Um, this is going to be the last one of the year for a couple of reasons. First off, December is usually a very, very busy time for me. There's a number of extra things going on in the church, not just extra services, but there's a whole lot of other extra events, extra programs, that kind of thing. Of course, extra things with families and whatnot. So I'm not sure if I would really have time to do another one. I maybe could squeeze in another one next week, but I just don't think that it would be very good if I did. I just have a feeling that it probably I just wouldn't have a whole lot of time to prepare for it. So I did want to do another one though. I almost didn't do this one today just because I've been that busy. I've even had some extra stuff going on here, but I did want to do this last one here, and just to kind of finish out the year with this. So we will pick it back up starting in January again, but I just want to let everyone know this is going to be the last episode for the year, but we'll pick it back up in January. Today, we are going to be doing something a little bit special, per request. I almost didn't do this, but in thinking about it, I decided to go through it. We are going to be going through a Julie Roy's article. Julie Roy's is a journalist. She has done a lot of good work. She wrote a whole lot about James MacDonald. She's also written a lot about Mark Driscoll. Sometimes she does kind of go off into off into left field sometimes, where she was kind of going off on John MacArthur. Some of the stuff there I think was a bit of a stretch, but she's someone who I really appreciate the work that she has said regarding James MacDonald, and really appreciate what she said regarding Mark Driscoll. However, she's not someone that I particularly trust. She definitely reminds me of David French, who I also don't trust. Someone who is either just so naive or has such a particular version of Christianity. But we'll kind of get into that in a little bit here. I do want to kind of go through her article and take a look at it. The article in question is asking, is conservatism biblical? Now, this is an interesting question. The funny thing is that in this article here, they're only going to sort of slightly touch on it. And the other funny thing is that as much as they are wanting to ask the question, is conservatism biblical, I don't talk a whole lot about the Bible. I almost didn't do this because when I started reading this, and I kind of started getting the initial impression based off of the paragraph, the opening paragraph here, I thought I really knew what this was going to be, and it kind of is this, but I have heard this argument basically my whole life, and it's essentially this: well, Christians don't need to be political. Christians shouldn't get involved in politics. Or if they do, they shouldn't have political goals. They shouldn't think of themselves as a political group at all. And I've heard that pretty much my whole life. I know a lot of Christians who believe that. I've thought that for a long time. I don't really think that anymore, and I'll explain why. But one of the big things that sort of changed my mind on this, it's not the only thing, but one of the things that sort of initially started me to question this philosophy, is I noticed that for a lot of the people preaching this, that Christians shouldn't be political, it was only talking about Christians who were more or less conservative. Now, I've spoken in the past about how do you define conservative, what does conservative mean, and how it's sort of become a squishy term, very much like evangelical. But I always noticed that. So, you'd have Christians go to a Trump rally, and you'd have a lot of these people, no, you shouldn't go to a Trump rally because Christians shouldn't be political. If you want to vote for somebody, maybe it's okay to vote for somebody, but you shouldn't go to a Trump rally because we don't be political. And then many of these same people, though, would either go or would tell people to go, or wouldn't say anything to Christians who are going to BLM protests. And the thing is so as long as you were promoting leftist causes, well, then it was okay for Christians to be political. But if it was more right-leaning causes, well, no, don't be political, right? And so the whole point of that argument is to basically try to prevent Christians from being political, Christians who have a conservative bent, if you will. It's essentially trying to take them out of the game by using things that Jesus says, right? Like, my kingdom is not of this earth. And so you shouldn't be involved. You shouldn't care about politics. Shouldn't be involved in it at all. And I'm not saying that that's what Julie is saying here. I'm saying that's what I've heard many people say, is that there's been that inconsistency. And I don't like that. I have a very negative reaction to that. Again, because it is total hogwash. I hate that inconsistency. Well, conservatives, you can't be political if you're really going to be Christian. Oh, but no. Hey, if you're Christian, you want to promote these leftist political causes. Oh, that's totally fine. I hate that inconsistency. But let's take a look at this article here. We'll go through it here. I'm gonna bring it up here. And so it says, is conservatism biblical? What are the dangers of mixing Christianity and politics? It's funny because as much as they say that, they're not really going to go into the dangers a whole lot. But anyway, so welcome to the Roys Report. Julie Roys. Today I'm going to be addressing the issue head-on with Coleman Luck, the author of Curse of Conservatism. He argues that we've equated biblical with conservative, and we've mixed the kingdom of God with the kingdom of man. Coleman holds conservative theological and political views. He warns against syncretism that's been seeping into the church. 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ said that his kingdom was not of this world, see? Coleman writes, his followers have been trying to prove him wrong ever since. Jesus also said, all authority on heaven and earth has been granted to me. Go therefore and disciple the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jesus being contradictory, inconsistent, or maybe you're just not understanding what he said. So Coleman offers his perspective from a unique vantage point. In the 1980s, Coleman was a Hollywood producer and worked on the hit TV series The Equalizer, Gabriel's File, yada yada. So Foundation, very short order, the leader of that organization began meeting with evangelical and conservative political leaders to map out what eventually became the moral majority. And if you know anything about the conservative movement, you know that the moral majority was huge in the 1980s, and it was credited for many political victories, including electing President Ronald Reagan. Of course, no one is talking about the moral majority today. We're talking about Donald Trump and perhaps the most politicized pandemic ever. But the dangers of mixing politics and Christianity remain the same, and so I'm excited to speak with Coleman today. So then she wants to thank her sponsors, yada, yada, yada. So then, she announces him and everything. So I know, Coleman, there are two things you're never supposed to discuss. Those are politics and religion. And we're going to be diving headlong into both those today. That's an old statement. Tons of people discuss that. And the idea that you're never supposed to discuss them is sort of silly in the first place. I mean, how are you ever supposed to evangelize people if you don't ever talk about religion? It's kind of silly. But anyway. So I thank you for being willing to do that. I'm navigating some waters that are filled with landmines, but thank you. Pleasure. So then she asked them, so I'd like to know a little bit about the whole experience and how that's informed your view on politics and the church and religion and how they interact. I was recruited the organization Christian Freedom Foundation by the president of the organization, a man named Edward Rowe. I was brought on board to be involved in marketing and advertising. I was marketing director. I was in my late 20s. Did much on organization for several decades, maybe 34 years. Actually, where I got involved in the past, it had been the whole focus of this particular organization, as I understand it, was that they were arguing for the return to the gold standard. So that was the Christian Freedom Foundation, I guess economically. Well, a new president came in, Mr. Rowe, and he had the idea that he was going to move the organization in a direction, so I was intrigued. I would be able to work. We'd start a new magazine. We'd be doing things that were speaking to the issues of our day, and that was so important to me from a Christian perspective. That was what I was most interested in doing, so I moved my family. We were living on the East Coast of Christianity today. We moved across the United States, Southern California. For a few months, everything went fine. I brought on board a friend of mine, a colleague, a CT. He was a journalist to help us with the magazine and be a journalist. Rowe also brought on board several other young men to be leading various divisions of his new organization. So it started, and we were worked away for 3 months, 4 months, and all of a sudden things got a little strange. Roe began going off for meetings, and we didn't know exactly what he was doing. But he was going off for meetings with other Christian leaders. We didn't really know what it was. Later, we found a couple of names that we'd never found out. Everybody. I think Bill Bright was involved in it. And so he thinks, he doesn't know, but he thinks. And so was a congressman named John Colin. Again, I wonder if does he just think that this congressman was involved? Does he know? At that time, from Arizona, he would go off to these meetings, but he wouldn't tell us what he was doing. And he would be gone for several days. And he did begin to talk about promoting John Colin. And he wanted to do an article in the new magazine about Representative Colin. This didn't feel good to me. It just felt like this is not the place where we should be promoting political party person. Now, I don't really know what the magazine was about when he was there, but the whole magazine was talking about getting about on the gold standard. And he thinks that that's not the place to be talking about a political party person. It's kind of weird to me. I mean, wanting to get back on the gold standard, that's a political point. And I understand that the guy who came on board wanted to move it in a new direction, so I don't really know what direction he was moving in, but it was just sort of weird that he talked about, well, yeah, I joined this magazine that was, making a political point, wanting to get back on the gold standard, but it just didn't feel right promoting a political person in this magazine. It was right before Christmas of the year, and I'd only been there for about 6 months. All of us, that staff, had only been there for just a short period of time. He brought each of us in and fired each one of us. There was no severance. There was no explanation for what was going on. 2 of us had moved across the entire United States to be in this organization. Didn't give us any help. The attitude was absolutely brutal. He basically said, well, you're living in Salem, California, so enjoy. That was it. I was in my late 20s. I had a wife and 3 children. We're stuck in Southern California, and I didn't know anybody here. My friend Barry Dole, he's from Canada. He didn't know anybody either. So he moved his family back to Canada at his expense. I had to move my family back to we went to Wheaton area at our expense. This was a new way of doing business, because in all situations I'd been in the past, at least there had been some compassion within the evangelical world. I love how he takes this like one instance, right, or at least the way that he writes, like, in the past. It's not as if, right, like that, Again, maybe it's just the way that I'm reading here, but it just feels like when I first read this, it's like, well, in the past. Oh, but now there's no compassion. There's no compassion in the evangelical world now, because he had this one experience. But maybe he's just saying, oh, in the past there had been. Right? It's a weird way of saying it. But there's absolutely no compassion for Mr. Rowe. It took years later for me to determine what was really going on. And I discovered years later that what he had done was basically cleaned out the Christian Freedom Foundation, and that legal entity that had been created became the basis for the moral majority, and he was getting involved with other people of like mind. But what it communicated to me was a tremendous, brutal kind of syncretism, where the Christian faith, how you deal with your brother and sister in Christ did not matter. All that mattered was our intention to goal, and that we're going to set up a Christian party. We're going to do something totally new, and it was political. And that was all the way back in 1974. Now, notice here, right? This is sort of weird. You take something that he did and, bringing on a whole bunch of people and firing them without any severance, any kind of help, right? Like, I think we could all kind of look and say, yeah, that's not good, right? If you wanted to clean out, you wanted to take it in a new direction and you wanted to clean people out, that's one thing. But if you're going to, I've been there 6 months, I should get something, right? So we can recognize that the attitude that the employer had was a brutal attitude, not the best attitude to have. Why does he have to equate that, though, with, well, now he's getting into politics. Oh, see, right? That's the way that shaded. Oh, because he's getting into politics. Now, no, he was so brutal. Whereas if he just hadn't, he wouldn't have been? I'm sorry. I've been to churches before where pastors have gotten fired. They didn't hardly get any severance or anything. They didn't get any notice, and they'd move their whole family there. People can be brutal. It doesn't matter what cause they're promoting. It doesn't matter if it's people can be brutal in non-profits or in profits and political and non-political. So the issue isn't the fact that they were now political. The issue is the fact that the guy's being brutal. But why are you trying to link it as if, because he was being political now, I had to be brutal? Kind of silly. When you say this became the moral majority, when I think of the moral majority, I think Jerry Falwell Sr. I think of Lynchburg, Virginia. How did Roe connect with Falwell, or how did that transpire? I believe that he did, although I don't know the details of it, obviously. He didn't share anything with me. I just discovered that the legal entity had been transferred over to them. Now, the nature of how that was done, I couldn't answer, but the fact that it was done was apparent. So I think what's so interesting in our current political landscape, I mean, we've had Christians involved in politics for a long time, and forever Christians have fallen in different places on the political spectrum. Time out. Can we acknowledge, though, that the political spectrum is different from a long time ago than where it is now? Yeah, I mean, it was specifically in the United States. That, like, even 10 years ago, where the Democrats were versus where they are now, or where the Republicans were 10 years ago versus where they are, nowhere really close by and large. I mean, maybe you can kind of look at graphs and see, like, the Republican, and again, they've done studies on this before, right, where Republicans kind of moved a little bit one way, but, like, Democrats have moved a long way from where they were by and large. Democratic Party, from what they're supporting. It's not the same system. So the idea that there's this, well, Christians have constantly fallen on political spectrums as if, like, well, it just doesn't really matter what you believe politically, I guess. Oh, well, we can all hold Christians. We can all hold different political opinions. That's not true. I don't know if that's really what she's trying to communicate here. I just want to really put that out there, though, that the political system, again, where people are, where they line up the spectrum, it's not the same that it was back in the 1980s or the 1990s or even the early 2000s. It is very, very different. It's changed a good bit even from 2016. So, I just wanted to point that out. And I think whereas beforehand you could sort of have seen people line up on a spectrum differently, now it is so shifted that we're seeing things that if Christians are having these political points, they are way, way off. And they're either ignorant of what they're really saying, or maybe they're not actually Christian. And again, you could look at this either, left or right of the spectrum in some of these areas. But anyway, so there's always been differences of opinion. But what I'm seeing is that within conservatism, so among conservative Christians, there seems to be a great deal of polarization. And I saw, right, just within conservatism, there's polarization, apparently, right? I know. She's going to address this later on. Well, I don't feel called to talk about liberals. Okay, but could you not bring them into the conversation, right? You just wanted to talk about how Christians could fall into different places along the political spectrum, but you're not going to talk about polarization on sort of non-conservatives, right? Progressive or liberal. Again, it's not really fair to call them liberals anymore. They're more progressives. Progressives? Yeah. And I saw this kind of come to a head, and it's not over the issues. Like, it's not like we're disagreeing on abortion, for example, or disagreeing on, what's the best economic fiscal policy. Those things we seem to agree on. It seems to be the way of engagement, the place that politics should have. And so I saw this just recently, and I'm sure you've been following this as well, but at World Magazine, which World and I have a great relationship for a very long time. In fact, Marvin Aglency, who was the editor-in-chief, I guess he technically still is for a few more months, but he has resigned. He was the one that stuck by me when I was reporting on James McDonald and Harvest Bible Chapel, and I'm very grateful to him for that. But he's leaving. A number of editors are leaving, and it seems like a lot of it has to do with World Opinion Page. For example, Sophia Lee, who's one of the editors who resigned, she wrote in her resignation letter today, "Today my biblical conviction remains strong, but my understanding and comprehension of the world we live in has become less black and white. It is with that acknowledgement of my still growing process and with overflowing gratitude that I announce my resignation from World. It wasn't an easy decision, but I feel uncomfortable about World Opinions, which has declared itself unquestionably conservative. Even as a theological Orthodox Christian, I never felt entirely comfortable in the politically conservative evangelical world and its tendency to mark certain political and cultural instincts as biblical." Well, why not? I mean, don't steal. That's a political belief, right? We want laws that talk about not stealing. Isn't that biblical? Wouldn't you consider the pro-life movement a biblical position? What's wrong with having political positions that are biblical? I mean, really and truthfully, right? Why would I want a political position if the Bible wasn't okay with it? Now, if you wanted to say that, well, the Bible doesn't say anything about it, so there's some freedom here, right? Like, okay, uh, that's fine, right? So, maybe certain economic policies where it's like, okay, well, we're kind of following the biblical principle, but maybe there's a disagreement on the exact details there where the Bible is silent. Like, that's one thing, right? But there are political positions that are straight up biblical. So, what? Cultural instincts as biblical? I mean, it's so vague. I'm like, what in the world? So what do you make of that? Are we going a little bit too far when we begin to say this is how all Christians need to believe politically, or begin marrying conservative theology with conservative politics? Well, again, if the Bible says it and it's a political position, then yeah, I would say that all Christians do need to believe that politically. Right? I mean, preservation of life. Now, could you have some disagreements there, maybe about the exact details of that? Yeah, but I mean, really, again, right? If somebody was saying, "Hey, let's make murder acceptable," wouldn't you think that all Christians needed to agree on that, right? Or let's say that someone said, "Hey, you know what? Let's bring back slavery." Don't you think that the Bible is against? I'm imagining Julie would think the Bible would be against slavery. Don't you think she believes Christians should all hold that political opinion? I know the people who were writing the abolitionist Christians thought that way. They thought that everyone should be against it, a good many of them. I mean, what? If suddenly, there was a movement that said, I think that rape should be legal, wouldn't you want Christians to feel like they can't have that political opinion because the Bible is so clear on the issue of rape? So, right, but and this is the problem that I have with articles, like, is that because when you talk about these other issues, oh, well, of course that, right? So, but they're trying to present it as, oh, we can't ever have political opinions that are also biblical for some reason. Oh, that's somehow a bad thing. But then again, it's very clear. I think that Julie would have certain opinions that line up from her Bible. And like I said, shouldn't we want our Bible to be determining our politics in a lot of ways? And how the Bible speaks about politics? I mean, just from the idea, right, that man is made in the image of God. It comes from the Bible, right? In the image of God, he made them male and female. That played a part in the forming of the Constitution and the governing, right, and the polis and the politics. Are we okay with that? Do we have to? What is this thing that in order to engage in the political worldview, we have to somehow leave the Bible out of it? Why? Why, as Christians, should we say, oh, well, I believe the Bible is the Word of God, but I guess God doesn't have anything to say about how we run our country? Well, I think the key word is syncretism. And that's what's been going on for a long time. People don't understand what syncretism is. I'd like to define it this way. Syncretism is attempting to mesh or marry two really irreconcilable philosophies or opinions or approaches. It's sort of like saying, I want to make something out of the combination of fire and water. We're going to have something that's new, like Reese's peanut butter cups. This approach that, as I've observed now for decades, beginning in 1974, and strangely enough, when I was in Hollywood, I saw it there back in 1988 in a strange way. This syncretism, combine that with the desperate desire of so many Christians to follow wolves. That's what the real heart of so much of this is. Wolves at every sort of level. And you know how I think when you put those two things together, you're dealing with a terrible situation? I view it right now in this country for the nation and for the church as just a time of unbelievable tragedy, and the darkness is increasing. Well, I really wish I knew what he was talking about there, but on the issue of following wolves, I've spoken about this. I know other people have spoken about this. So he's not wrong when he says that, Christians don't mind following wolves. However, I would say that part of the reason why Christians have a tendency to follow wolves is because when you do have good Christian men who are actually wanting to lead, a lot of people who are we could maybe put in a similar category as Julie here, tend to poo-poo all over these guys. Oh, you shouldn't follow them. Oh, don't do that. Don't, no, no, no. And, or you tell a lot of these Christians, right, well, you shouldn't get involved here. You shouldn't do this. And so they're not experienced. So they don't learn the difference between, who's someone who has leadership and is truly wanting to lead and get you involved in this, and who's just a wolf. Who's someone who's just wanting to take advantage of you. But I don't know, that was a very interesting paragraph, because he tried to define it, but then he it's weird because he kind of misses what he was like. He's like, okay, the Christians want to follow wolves, and he's trying to link that with something else. But what's this other thing that he's trying to link it with? But anyway, she continues. Well, when you bring up wolves and compromises Christians have made, obviously, Donald Trump has been perhaps the most controversial figure, not just in American culture, but I would say within the church. Because here's a man who was married 3 times, had admitted to doing some things. I mean, I remember when the Inside Edition tape came out, and he talked about grabbing women and his license to do that, and how he liked to walk through the Miss American pageant because he was the owner of it, and walk through their dressing rooms when they were not dressed. And I heard that, and immediately I was appalled. But yet the argument has been made, we're not electing a pastor, we're electing a president. It's about the policies. It's about all these things that began to feel very uncomfortable for me, and I've always felt like we need to be active in our culture and society. I mean, that's part of the working out of our faith, but we're doing it because it's the working out of our faith, right? So to me, compromise the things that I hold so dear, that was difficult for me. In fact, it was a bridge too far for me. But I know for a lot of Christians it wasn't. Now, okay, let's do a pause right here. If you're going to talk about the election of Donald Trump, and you do not bring up who it was that he was running against, I don't care what you have to say. Because in my opinion, you're not having an honest conversation about it. As I've said before, Donald Trump was not my first choice for president in 2016. But when it came down between him and Hillary Clinton, I made the choice. And again, because you had essentially you had 4 choices there. Well, basically 3 though. You could vote for Donald Trump, you could vote for Hillary Clinton, you could not vote at all, or you could do a write-in candidate, which is essentially the same as not voting at all. Now, if evangelicals did as Julie said and didn't vote for Donald Trump, Hillary would be president. And if you are not willing to acknowledge that fact, I don't care what you have to say, because that was the reality of the situation. So you want to talk about compromise. It's not, again, were there some evangelicals who even in the primaries like, yeah, Donald Trump, well, yeah. There were a lot more people who were like, well, he's not my first choice, but he's better than Hillary Clinton. And so if you're not willing to talk about that, I don't care what you have to say, because you're not having an honest conversation. I'm not saying she's lying here. I'm saying that she's not approaching this conversation honestly. This is like saying, I can't believe you shot that man. How dare you shoot that man? I thought you're a Christian. Don't you believe in the preservation of life? I cannot agree with someone who is shooting somebody. And you fail to mention the rest of the context with that person was just about to kill you, and they were about to kill your wife. So your options were, well, let him kill you and kill your wife, or shoot him. But here she is talking about the election of Donald Trump, even messing up the stuff when it comes to the insider tapes, and doesn't mention anything about the context of that situation. As if to just say that, you know what, there was nobody else running, and conservatives they just wanted to pick Donald Trump just because. Now, as I said back in 2016, as I still hold, if you felt like that you couldn't vote for Donald Trump, then that's fine. And I don't have a problem with that. And there are some Christians that I knew that said, look, I don't really like Hillary Clinton, and I don't really like Donald Trump, but so I'm not going to vote for either one of them. And I said, well, I respect your decision. And I think that that's a fine position. However, I think that given the situation, we could take a look at Trump and could say, yes, his character is not good. Now, a lot of the stuff that she's mentioning did happen a long time ago. You could take a look at his life and say, well, okay, is he still reflecting so many of these attributes? As far as the insert tape, he did apologize for it. Now, yes, this was after the whole thing came out, but he did apologize, so I guess you could, take that for whatever you want to take it for. You could say, well, I don't like some of these character attributes about him. He's not my first pick. He's not the person that I would hold up. But yes, he's better than Hillary. I know what her policies are. I know what she plans to do. If I don't vote for Trump, it is very likely that she will be president. So you cannot leave that out. And I get so tired of so many of these sanctimonious people talking about, I can't believe you voted for Donald Trump. But you know what? They don't have to live in a world where Hillary was president. Now, if you want to argue that Hillary would have been a better president than Donald Trump, then fine. Let's have that conversation. If you want to say that Hillary, again, was the more biblical option to pick, that's fine. I don't have a problem with you not wanting to participate, feeling, you know what, I don't feel like I can participate in the political system. That's fine, but guess what? Since we still have to deal with the political consequences, whether or not we participate in the system, then I don't think it's wrong that if I'm going to participate in the system, and unless you can prove it to me biblically, then I think you'd need to show me that too. Then you need to not try to bind my conscience with it. Unless you can show me biblically how it was sinful to vote for Donald Trump, don't try to bind my conscience. And especially don't do this when you're ignoring the context. You're not bringing that up. Wasn't between Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan. Wasn't between Donald Trump and Billy Graham. Wasn't between Donald Trump and someone else. So some better person. And again, unless you want to argue Hillary Clinton was better, which I don't think she was. I also wonder if this whole thing about, compromise here. And again, I know. She doesn't feel called to talk about liberal Christians. I know. She doesn't feel called to talk about liberal Christians. But I just wonder, in her heart of hearts, if she has any thoughts, about the Christians who compromised and voted for Joe Biden and all of his policies, many of which I would hold to be not biblical, and anti-biblical in some cases, like, his abortion and the promoting transgenderism, homosexuality, and that kind of thing. And they compromised their beliefs in order to vote for Joe Biden just for the purpose of getting Donald Trump out of office. Now, like I said, I know she doesn't feel called to talk about liberals. I do wonder, though, if she sees an inconsistency there. If she feels that they are just as wrong as the Christians who voted for Donald Trump. So, and now we're having the same arguments, these same kinds of discussions. How is it that we should be looking at compromises? Because, we do live in a democracy. We do have to compromise on certain things. When is it compromise that we can't do? What kind of perspective do we need to have? What lens do we need to filter these things through so that we can discern how we engage? Well, I would say a biblical lens. Well, to me, the key to this is simple. When compromise becomes worship, then you have gone way too far. And by worship, I just don't mean worshiping some deity, but I'm talking about the worship of following a wolf because you decide that the ends justify the means. And what has been so appalling to me over the last 10 years or less has been the unbelievable willingness of Christians to absolutely be like blind sheep. Now, Donald Trump is the product of Hollywood. He would not exist without Hollywood, And when you think about it in those terms, here are Christians across the United States who would say, we can't stand Hollywood. We hate what they do. They take someone who has absolutely had all of his major successes from that industry, my industry. Wow, humble, this guy. I know the industry very, very well. I know wealthy people very, very well, powerful people. I never met him. I met men just like him. In fact, I worked for one. Well, so, okay, you've never met him, but, there's men just like him. Anyway. So, when I say that I understand that these people are absolutely narcissists, But they are psychopaths in their own way. So I guess you're saying Donald Trump is a psychopath, even though you never met him. But, when you think about it, that means they'll do whatever they want. They don't care about anything except getting from you what they want. They stop getting that. Then they turn on you, and it becomes a wolf attack. So, I think about it right now, and I say, there are Christians today who have come to worship what they consider to be America. This idea that America is somehow the city on a hill, that this nation is absolutely should be a Christian nation. Michael Flynn made that statement not too long ago. He thinks everything is thought to be just a totally Christian nation. There is a total marriage of politics and Christianity, which means the end of Christianity as we know it. Why? I want America to be a Christian nation. Now, to be clear here, when I say I want America to be a Christian nation, I don't mean that I want Christianity to be the officially recognized religion of America. But I want the leaders of America to have a Christian worldview. I want them to be Christian. I want the policemen, the governors, the butchers, the trashmen, the school teachers, all of them to be Christian. I want the atmosphere of America to be that of Christian. And again, true Christianity, right? Not just Jesus, 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 and we don't know anything about him, but true biblical Christians. Why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want people living out the true faith? Why wouldn't you want people who are following God, God who is love, God who made the world, God who is light and calls us out of darkness into light? Why wouldn't you want a nation like that? Now, am I saying that if I don't have a nation that is a Christian nation, that somehow I'm lost and that my faith is in jeopardy and all these other things? Well, of course not. That would be to idolize it. And to somehow doubt the sovereignty of God because, the nation isn't a Christian nation. But just wanting that, what's wrong with that? Again, I used to think this way, but even now I just don't get it. Of this we can't, because if it's not a Christian nation, then it's going to be an anti-Christian nation. And I'm sorry, but there's really no neutral ground. This idea that, there's some neutral ground. And, so the country, it can just sort of be this sort of neutral place. That's just not true. And it's been shown to not be true. The most neutral ground is when it is a Christian nation. That's when it provides the most tolerance to other religions. You think what we have now is really a tolerant nation? Not really. It's only tolerant to those who are politically convenient. That's not really tolerant, though. So again, the marriage of politics and Christianity, which means the end of Christianity as we know it, apparently. Well, it's the end of Christianity as you know it. Doesn't mean it's the end of Christianity. But, newsflash, the Christianity as you know it is dying. This kind of syncretism has taken place over many centuries. You can see the history of it going all the way back to Constantine. You can see it among the Puritans of New England. You can see all the attempts that have been made to make this into something that it will not, because the message of Jesus is love. And I guess love has nothing to do with politics? His sacrifice on the cross, the commission that he gave to his church to go into the world and preach the gospel, does not fit with establishing a Christian nation in this world ever. It doesn't work. Well, that's just not true. That's historically untrue. And of course, again, right, go into the world and preach the gospel. It says go into the world and disciple the nations. Every nation should be a Christian nation. Why? Because Jesus is King of kings. He is the King of the kings. They submit to him. What does Romans 13 call those leaders in the government? It calls them his deacons, his ministers. Every nation is to be a Christian nation. Everyone will bow the knee to Christ. Whether you want to think that that's going to happen in this life, or whether you think that's going to happen when Jesus returns, doesn't change the fact. Now, right now, there are going to be rebels. People are still rebelling. But does he not believe that Jesus reigns? Does he not believe that Jesus will reign, and I would say is reigning over the heaven and the earth right now? Well, and it does seem like we've forgotten that we're of a different kingdom. We are not of this world. There is the kingdom of heaven, and then there's the kingdom of this world. And if you're not going to bother to explain it any more than that, then why even bother saying that in the first place? And so when I hear people saying that we're out to save America, and we're using political means to say that, and I'm not saying that we can't engage politically, but when I hear... Anyway... But when I hear these statements, or when I hear this dichotomy, that if you're not for us, you're against us, I've been struggling with trying to understand how my brothers and sisters, who we supposedly believe the same things and yet have adopted such different methods, well, I'm sorry, but could it also be, though, that, not everyone in the body is the same? That different people might have different perspectives, so they might have different methods. Now, the question to ask is not because they different, does that mean that they're bad? The question to ask is, are the methods biblical? Right? So, for example, if someone says, hey, I want to get a whole bunch of people to convert to Christ by threatening to kill them, is that a biblical method? Well, no, right? So, but if someone says, hey, I want to go out and call people to Christ by knocking on a lot of doors and telling a lot of people about Jesus and just finding as many people as I can find and telling them about Jesus. Well, is that a biblical method? Well, yeah, I would say so. I think we see the disciples doing that, right? If someone else said, well, the way that I want to tell people about Christ is I want to become their friend. I want to have good conversations with them. It's a much slower process, but so rather than talking to a whole lot of different people at once, I want to talk to a lot of people individually. I really want to, encourage them. So I want to make a lot of long-lasting relationships and share Christ with them. Was that method biblical? Yeah, I think we see that method too. Both of those are different methods. Oh my gosh, they're different. How could these two people who believe the same thing have different methods? Well, I guess because they're different people. The question to ask is, again, are the methods biblical or not? Is there a place for Christianity to intersect with politics? Now, a lot of Christians throughout history would say yes, there is an intersection. I would argue that the Bible would say yes. Again, Luther himself established the three estates. That doesn't mean, now again, right, the church and the state is a different thing from Christianity and the state. But Christians have been engaging politically for a long time. And here's the thing is that what governments really tend to do is they don't so much affect change in culture as much as they enshrine change in culture. This is why people typically tend to say, politics is downwind of culture, right? So when culture is moving a particular direction, that's when the politics tend to follow it. And so that's what they can do is they can enshrine something. They can enshrine cultural movements. Is it okay to do that? I think yes. If they want to say no, then they need to prove biblically how it's not. And just throwing out this idea that, there's a heavenly kingdom and there's an earthly kingdom, and we're of the kingdom of heaven, that ain't going to do it for me. You need to explain that a little bit more. Because, I guess that means that we shouldn't care about our neighbors because we're of the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of this world. So I guess we shouldn't care about helping the poor. I guess we shouldn't care about, making hospitals because we're of the kingdom of heaven. So all that we should be doing is evangelism. We shouldn't try to, help the poor. We shouldn't care about them. Shouldn't try to feed them. Shouldn't try to clothe them. Even though the Bible says that we should, we'll see. But we're of the kingdom of heaven. So we're not of the kingdom of this world. So we shouldn't care about those things. Or maybe that's a very shallow way to understand the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of the world. And we need to get a little bit deeper. And we need to see what the Bible actually says about both of those concepts. And I see this is one of the reasons why I wanted not to do this, because I can tell that I'm being catty here. I understand that I'm being a little bit catty with this, but again, I've heard these things so many times. I used to buy into this. And it's kind of silly. And again, not saying that Julie is saying this here or this other Coleman or anything, but when I was buying into this, and a lot of other people I knew, it was made a great excuse to not do difficult work. And of course, again, right? It seems to me, and I don't know this, so I'm just guessing here. So take this for what it is. It's speculation. But it seems to me that the type of Christianity that Julie and Mr. Coleman here seem to want to present is a Christianity that tells people about Jesus, gathers for church so long as the government says that it's okay. As long as the government gives the okay, then you can gather for church. You can go out and tell people about Jesus. I'm sure that there are probably ways in which she doesn't want people to tell people about Jesus, but you can tell people about Jesus. You can engage in mercy ministries, so giving money and food to the poor, clothing closets, shelters, food banks, that kind of stuff. Christians can do that. They can engage in tutoring, as long as they stick to the school subjects. Though you don't bring your Christianity into that. But you can tutor as long as there's that separation there, and you can engage in habitat, right? Like feeding people, having little Christmas programs and that kind of stuff, Christian programs, like the Christmas plays and, that kind of stuff. And that's basically it. And I would imagine that, anyone else, anything else, though, that just sort of seems to be outside their purview. And here's the thing, a lot of what I said in there's nothing absolutely wrong with it. And when it comes to Christianity, there's everything right. Should we be about helping the poor? Yes, we should. Should we be about caring for those, right? Caring for those in need? Yes. Should we be gathering for worship? Yes. Even if the government says we shouldn't, we still should. We should be about doing those things. So, and if your Christianity is, look, I want to gather for worship, I want to minister to the poor, I want to minister to the sick, the widows and the orphans, that's all that I want to do, I don't have a problem with you. Where I have a problem, though, is that when that's all that you want to do, and you think that that's all that Christians can do. Now, if that's what you think, you need to prove that to me biblically. And if you're just going to use that one little quote from James to prove it biblically, you are taking that out of context, ignoring the rest of what the Bible says about all of these other issues. That one verse by itself does not prove that that is the only thing that the church can ever engage in. I said, if that's what you want to do, I don't have a problem with that. We don't all have to do the same things. Not all of us are called to be foreign missionaries. Is foreign missions good? Yeah, it's absolutely good. So I recognize that for some people, they say, well, look, I don't really want to get involved politically. And okay, if you don't want to, I don't think you should. But don't get on to other Christians. Don't try to bind their conscience. Don't try to tell them and make them shame them into not doing it just because it's something that you don't want to do. Again, unless you can prove it biblically. And that one verse from James where it says this is what pure and undefiled religion is, to keep, to aid the widows and the orphans, to keep one undefiled from this world. That verse by itself does not prove that only doing what I just described there, that's the only Christianity, you can't do anything more. Like I said, I don't know this fully, but I just get the impression that seems to be the kind of Christianity that Julie seems to propose. And she even, what gives more evidence to this is that the fact that she comes from an Anabaptist background. She says, and for me, I come from an Anabaptist background, which a lot of people don't know what that means. But basically, we were the first ones in Switzerland who started doing believers' baptism because we thought that confession of faith and baptism should go together. Now, Anabaptists are very much against the idea of Christians in government, to the point to where a lot of Anabaptists forbid members from participating in any kind of state position, any type of magisterial position. They say, no, you can't do that. So with that being her background, I think it stands to reason that, she has a big problem with Christians engaging politically at all. Of course, again, I wonder, I don't know, because she doesn't feel called to talk about liberals or I guess progressives, but I wonder though, again, does that extend to, well, when other Christians participate in more leftist causes? Like I said, I don't know, because she doesn't feel called to talk about them, so I guess we just have to, I don't know, I guess we'll just have to leave it up in the air. Anyway, but we also objected to the government being run, even though now it wasn't the Catholic government, it was a Protestant government, but it was run the same way. And it was, no, we should have freedom and convictions, and we don't want the government impacting our religion, our church. And I've heard Christians, and it's interesting because to me it's the same group who have said, yes, the church should be impacting politics, but politics and the government shouldn't be impacting the church. Coleman, you've been watching this for 40 years. What have you seen? Is the church impacting politics and government, or is politics and the government impacting the church? Well, it's probably a give and a take. Yeah? Now, I mean, obviously, yes, the church should be impacting it. Of course, there are reasons why the government is impacting it, but I really would, again, say, because of my understanding here, that government more so sends to enshrine cultural values. There are really other cultural things that have been impacting the church. You know, TV has impacted the church far more, I think, than the government has. You know, I would say, you know, music has impacted the church far more than the government has. Culture in general, culture has been impacting because the Christian culture has changed, and thus the politics have changed. So some of these cultural impacts have been enshrined through government. Oh, I think the latter, absolutely. You know, and I think that I've always believed that there's a place for believers in Jesus who are truly following him to serve in government. Yes, and Hollywood too. Yeah, it's a good thing that he says that, right, because he works in Hollywood. So, anyway. And every place that's legitimate for a Christian to be. So I guess Hollywood is legitimate for a Christian to be. Now, like I said, I think Christians can work in Hollywood. It's just, anyway. But not to try to turn everything and take control of everything. Well, why not? I mean, right, if you want to try to, make believers Christians, make unbelievers, if you want to try to, convert unbelievers, obviously we don't do the converting here, the Spirit does, right? But if you want to, if your hope is that everyone eventually becomes a follower of Christ, wouldn't that then mean the taking over of these things? Now, I'm not saying that should be your number one top priority in every situation, right? But I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, like I'm gonna go work this job, and hey, I want to be the best. I'm gonna go start a business here, and I want it to be the best, and I want to be a Christian because we're gonna run it the way that God wants us to run it. We're gonna run it in a way that's most beneficial to our neighbors, because God loves people, and so when God tells us how to love people, we are loving people in a way that's most beneficial to them. Why would you be against that? Again, I don't have to have Christians in control of everything, but this idea where it's like, oh no, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you just no. I've been doing a lot of study about the Puritans in the 1600s, what happened to them, and what led them to the Salem witch trials. Yes, because what happened in the Salem witch trials is reflective amongst all Puritans, apparently. In the 1600s, there was a wonderful woman who lived outside of Boston. She had been a Puritan, but she decided she wasn't going to be a Puritan anymore. She became a Quaker. But she felt that there was a call of God upon her life to go back into Boston and to teach the Puritans what she believed God was telling her to teach them. This was a woman who had unbelievable courage. She went back in over and over, and every time she would go in, they would warn her. You don't come back here again, you're breaking our laws, and all the rest. She just kept doing it. Finally, on June 1st, 1960, they had tried her, they convicted her, and they hanged her on Boston Commons along with 3 Quakers who were all martyrs. Her name was Mary Barrett Dyer. She was my 9th great-grandmother. Now, I get what he's trying to say with this here, but the first time that I read this, I say, and no offense to this individual's 9th great-grandmother here, but, okay, she becomes a Quaker, then she goes back into a place, and she's warned over and over again that she's breaking their laws. She keeps intentionally breaking their laws. They try her, and then they hang her. Now, the way that he says it is that, oh, well, just because she was teaching them what she felt like God had wanted them to teach. Well, that somehow, I mean, what laws was she breaking, right? Like the way that this is framed, obviously it's painting her in the best possible. Like, she just wanted to teach him about God. She just trying to tell him about God, and they hung her. And maybe that's what happened. I don't know. It's very weird. But again, wouldn't you think that since they warned her and she kept going back there again and again and again, is that so much her, well, being a martyr? Or is that her basically intentionally breaking their laws? I mean, I wonder what this individual would say is if a man goes into a tribe somewhere, right, out in the deep jungle somewhere, and they kick him out, and he goes in, he's wanting to preach the gospel, right? And he goes in there, he's preaching the gospel, and they kick him out, and they say, look, we don't want you here. Get out of here. We don't want you here. And he goes back in, and they say, look, you need to get out of here. We are going to kill you. You are breaking our laws. We're showing you mercy. And then he goes back in again. And eventually they kill him. They try him, and they kill him. Now, would he consider that man a brave person, I wonder? I wonder if he would not have words. Well, why is that? He should have respected them. Maybe not. Maybe he would think of that man the same way, but I don't know. I've seen a lot of people who, whereas on the one hand, they might affirm what this lady was doing, his ninth grandmother, but for that other individual, well, they would shame him, even though they're basically doing the same thing. Of course, in her situation, unless you believe that Puritans aren't Christian for some reason, she's not even evangelizing. She's just teaching them a different doctrine. So I'm very proud to be a direct descendant of Mary's. But that's what these things, they don't stop. There's a progression that is going on here. That's ironic. It's not enough simply to say we're going to take control, then we're going to take control of everybody inside. We're going to make them believe exactly what we want to believe. And if they don't, they will be desperately punished. Well, no. Has that happened in history? Yes. There have been a number of times to when Christians have been in charge of governments, and that hasn't happened. Authoritarians come in all philosophies. Guess what? You don't have a Christian government right now. Christians aren't in charge of the culture right now. They're just as authoritarian. Why are you making this association as if to say that, oh, see, because they're Christian, oh, well, you can be opposed to authoritarians and still like to have a Christian government. How do you know? Because I'm opposed to totalitarian authoritarians in that way. It's recognizing the three estates, right? What is the realm that the state has? What is the realm that the church has? And what is the realm that the home has? The state doesn't have authority in the home or in the church. The church doesn't have authority in the state or in the home. The home doesn't have authority in the state or in the church. Right? And again, I'm simplifying this. I know it's a little bit more complicated, but I'm being very simplistic here. Right? But those are our three hierarchies. Those are three estates. So they are different realms of authority. Christians throughout history have had an understanding of this. So he has a very simplistic view. That goes on, so this spectrum, this continuum that goes on is in the entire history of the church when it is taking control of the government. I don't care where it is done. There is a disaster. And we're at that stage now. Again, provably false. I don't know if he's ignorant or lying. Provably false. I know he's being hyperbolic. Still false. God forbid that we get back with Donald Trump and the people who are following him to get back into power again. Then we got a real problem. Then we've got a real problem on our hands. We don't, the inflation rate, the border issues, rampant crime, that's not a real problem. But if we get Donald Trump back, then we're going to have a real problem on our hands. See, right now we don't have real problems on our hands. These are imaginary problems, apparently. They're not real problems. But if we got Donald Trump, then then we'd have real problems, don't you know? And it's so interesting that you bring that up because, again, our tradition as evangelicals is against those sort of things. My ancestors came here because we were getting burned at the stake because we didn't baptize infants, right? I mean, Protestants were doing the same thing Catholics were doing, right? Even though we were supposedly so different. Well, again, Protestant is a big group here. They're generalizing so much and talking about this. And I get it. You got to generalize a little bit here. But in some instances here, you're going to be doing some of the same things. Like for some of these cases, like you take what happened in Geneva, for example. Because people want to talk about what happened in Geneva, all right, with John Calvin and whatnot. They're having their laws. If you can't. Is your problem that they have laws and that they enforce their laws, or is your problem with the laws that they have? Why? And so, if your problems are with the laws that they have, then talk about the laws that they have that you don't like. Don't talk about this in such a vague way. What is it that the Protestants and the Catholics? Oh, what? The fact that they have laws about what you're supposed to believe. So you're saying that they shouldn't have laws about your faith at all? Now, if you're going to say that. Again, that's fine. You can make that point, but then argue that point. Say, no government should ever have a rule just dictating what people should or should not believe about, I guess, God. If you believe that, if you think that that's what it is, then argue that. If you think that the Bible, well, again, I guess you can't say the Bible, right? Because you can't have that opinion. Apparently, your politics can't be informed by the Bible. But, for those of you whose politics can be informed by the Bible, well, then say, okay, well, see, look, here's why we in the Bible think that, this should be a law, right? That, well, we don't have to enforce what people believe. In fact, that it would be better if there wasn't a law that enforced what people believe. This seems to provide a general equity, right? Again, though, you can talk about this in certain circumstances, but it's so generalized here that it's very easy to take a look at this and point out all of the various flaws. If you believe that pedophilia is wrong, you get punished desperately in this country. They want to control what you think. They want to control who you're attracted to. I doubt Julie would say that, but I mean, really, take a look at what they're saying and put that in there. They're not giving you much of a reason to show how it's different. It's different because the culture recognizes pedophilia as bad. But that's it. Why is it different for a government to say you can't be a pedophile versus if a government says you can't be, a Quaker? Now, I think that there is a reason why these two things are different, but they're not explaining that. They're not getting into that. They're talking about ways in which, again, sometimes, governments have been abused where you've had totalitarians and authoritarians in place. But the idea of conservatism and whether or not it is biblical really hasn't been addressed. Again, so much of this article just sort of seems to be saying, no, it can't be done. You can't ever mix your religion and politics. It doesn't ever work. To stop doing it. Don't try. If we look at history, like you're saying, our movements of evangelicals have come out of being true to our convictions above all else and not forcing our convictions. What? Our movement as evangelicals has come out of being true to our convictions above all else and not forcing our convictions. Well, what do you mean when you say forcing your convictions, right? See, again, this is where, how are you defining that? Are you talking about forcing by the government? Are you talking about forcing by culture? Are you not talking about forcing through argument? And again, why is that a good thing? Why is it a good thing that you don't force your convictions? If you believe that's a good thing, why? By what standard? Now, I'm not saying that it is a good or a bad thing. I'm just curious, okay, but why? Why is that defend that. Defend that point. Why is it a good thing not to force your convictions? Defend that. Because there are a whole lot of people with different convictions, and guess what? They do want to force them. They've got no problem forcing them on other people, so I would love to see you defend that. Why is it wrong to force your convictions on others? We want their hearts to be converted, not their behavior. Their behavior comes after their heart, is what my mother used to say. You can't clean a fish before you catch it, right? But that's what we're doing. Except for, you don't understand what the second purpose of the law is. There is this thing called the second use of the law. And let me see if I can just bring this up real quick here. But see, I'm wondering if Julie has ever heard about this before. Scripture shows that God intends his law to function in three ways, which Calvin crystallized in the form of the church's benefit as the law's threefold use. Its first function is to be a mirror reflecting to us both the perfect righteousness of God and our own sinfulness and shortcomings. As Augustine wrote, the law bids us as we try to fulfill its requirements and become wearied in our weakness under it, to know what to ask the help of grace. The law is meant to give knowledge of sin, and by showing our need of pardon and our danger of damnation, to lead us in repentance and faith to Christ. Here is the second function of the law. The civil use is to restrain evil. Though the law cannot change the heart, it can to some extent inhibit lawlessness by the threats of judgment, especially when backed by a civil code that administers punishment for proven offenses. It quotes Deuteronomy 13:6 through 11, 19:16 through 21, and Romans 13:3 and 4. Thus, it secures civil order and serves to protect the righteous from the unjust. So this very simplistic view that she's saying here about first you convert the heart, not the behavior comes after it, is a very shallow view. There is a place for what she's talking about, and ultimately, yes, the heart does want to be converted. We do want the heart converted. But we recognize, though, that the law of God does have a civil use as well. That it will impact behavior. And we see the grace of God in societies when they do follow biblical law, because it does prevent things like theft, which is a biblical law, murder, which is which is a biblical law, rape, which is a biblical law, adultery. So, again, does she think that murder should be legal? Hey, we don't want to force our convictions. Oh, look, I think it's wrong to murder, but I don't want to force my conviction on you. I don't want the government to force my conviction on you. Apparently, of course, she wouldn't say that. Well, yeah, I think that rape's wrong, but I don't want to force my conviction. I want you to agree with me first. I want to convert your heart before having the state. Of course not. This is a very shallow understanding of politics, of where Christianity intersects with the law. It is very shallow and it is very unhelpful. And it's inconsistent. And you can tell it doesn't pass the sniff test for that reason. Anyway, but that's what we're doing, and I know that you're getting this story from your grandmother because I've read your book. Oh, I love that story. Oh, it's a great story. Oh, that's wonderful. And there's so many people listening right now who might be saying, well, we're against women preachers, So, okay, was she preaching? But are you for that kind of force? So are you for that kind of force for women preaching? So am I against the idea of women being a preacher, going into a place multiple times, violating their laws? I guess they had a law again. If we're taking this as what's going on here, so a woman is going into a place, breaking the law and preaching, even though it's against the law for women to preach, and she continually goes in there and breaks their law, and then she's tried and she's hung for her crimes. So what are they just supposed to do? Allow her to break their laws? Oh, I guess they just shouldn't have those laws. I mean, really? Oh, are you for that kind of force? Well, are you for that kind of force if somebody wants to steal from somebody else? If somebody wants to just murder somebody else? Why is it different? Now, I'm not saying that it isn't different. But again, really, why is it different? Don't explain that. But that's what happens. And you talk about something in the book called The Politics of Panic. And that's the first time I've heard it put that way. But it really rang true that, yeah, we're living in this sort of panic state where the talk radio is whipping us. It's only talk radio whipping us into a frenzy. The mainstream media does nothing else. CNN never whips people into a frenzy. MSNBC doesn't whip people. It's just talk radio whipping people into a frenzy. Where, oh my goodness, if we don't do something to save America, to stop the liberals, this is what's going to happen. Kind of like how if Trump is literally Hitler. That's not whipping people into... I guess it's not his call to talk about those other elements, though, right? As if some of these things might be reactions to another notice. Again, this is why I don't like this type of approach here that ignores the context of this. It always comes across to me as dishonest, and I'm not saying that either one of these two individuals are lying. I'm saying that whenever I read this, because they're ignoring the larger context here, it comes across as dishonest to me. How are you going to talk about what talk radio is doing? You're not going to talk about the people who are calling Trump literally Hitler, saying Trump's going to nuke and kill us all. A mainstream media that, freaks out because he got 2 scoops of ice cream. How are you not even going to mention that? So, I can see this too. I mean, it's like, I know what the red meat is that you can put out there on the online, and people will go after that, but talk about this politics of panic and how we're being manipulated as Christians. Absolutely. The politics of panic has to do with the creation of delusion. Years ago, I ran into a story, and this is really, to me, it speaks to the whole issue of the church today in this country. The way in the Midwest, many years ago, rustlers would steal huge herds of sheep. The way they did it, they'd find a huge herd out in the middle of nowhere with no shepherd. They were on horseback. So what they would do is that they would fire their guns. They were a distance away from the flock. The flock would clump together. And then what they would do is they would run straight into the middle of the flock and stop. And then they would start shooting their guns over and over and absolutely create total panic. And then they would run straight from, the middle of that flock. And every time the entire flock would follow. They could keep on doing this with the flock of sheep, carrying them away across miles. All they had to do was frighten them enough. And that's exactly what's going on in our country today. Those leaders who have so much to gain because they want to maintain control of evangelical Christians know that all they have to do is frighten them enough, and they'll follow the wolves anywhere. I saw it happen in the most unbelievable way. Now, to be fair, there is something to be said for this. There are many, many grifters out there who take advantage of the fears and concerns of conservative Christians and are doing so. And conservative Christians should watch out for this. Christians in general should watch out for this. What's one of the big things that you notice here in his analogy, though? It was a flock with no shepherd. Very interesting, right? A flock with no shepherd. Maybe this is because a lot of pastors have been told what? Don't talk about these things. Don't mention these things. You can't ever talk about politics. The Bible doesn't have anything to say about these issues. And so maybe one of the reasons why the sheep are being led astray by wolves so often is because very much like this sort of Christianity that's kind of being promoted here through negation has caused many shepherds not to speak on these issues, leaving their sheep effectively without a shepherd when it comes to politics. So anyway, then he goes on. So here's a story here, leader. While I was there in Hollywood working at Universal Studios, working at Universal Television, all the way back in 1988, Universal decided to release a miserable little film called The Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese. This thing was a piece of junk. Was it blasphemous? Absolutely. Was it poorly done? It was so poorly done, it probably would have had a 15-minute life in theater. Well, the Christians on talk radio and everywhere else got a hold of this. And it suddenly became the ultimate test of whether we can control Hollywood. We're going to take control of this. We're not going to let them release that film. I was there at Universal, and I was watching all of this take place. I mean, it was amazing. Bill Bright got involved. He offered to buy the negative for $10 million, which communicated to everybody at Universal and all the people that made the film he thinks we're just whores. Anyway, all we care about is giving us money, and that's what he thinks of us. James Dobson got involved in this organization, which, dear Lord, it should have stayed with counseling children. The nature of what he got involved was pressuring this giant pressure. All these religious leaders, evangelical leaders, I didn't understand fully what was happening until one noon when I was driving out from Universal to go to lunch with a senior writer producer who worked for me, still a dear friend. I had shared my faith with him many times, I had with everybody I worked with. And when we're driving out of the front gate of Universal and all of a sudden they're surrounding us, thousands of evangelical Christians with placards sticking them in the front of our windshield with John 3:16 on them, and all these statements that come from the Bible that they had misapplied. Their whole purpose there was to show Universal that they were really serious, that they wanted the film to be stopped. And I'm seeing these people, and I'm looking at their signs thinking, young man, I knew John 3:16 long before you were born. My friend turns to me and he says, and I'll never forget it. He said, Coleman, if I didn't know you, I would hate these people. And that to me, it just broke my heart. Here it was, this opportunity that I was having to talk with people and the church as a whole. And all these religious leaders just stood up and said, we don't care about a single one. We don't care about that. All we care about is getting what we want. Wow. Way to just judge all of those people, apparently. Way to judge all of their hearts and motivations. Apparently you can read their hearts and that that's all that they wanted. All they cared about. If you were going to picket a place, why would you write John 3:16? For God so loved the world. I want you to stop this film. Hey, for sure, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Seems like an odd thing to bring to a protest. Huh. Maybe it was the only Bible verse you knew. I don't know. But still, odd Bible verse if you're just trying to get them to stop a film. But I wonder here for Mr. Coleman, and again, right? I wonder about this. What if there was a film that denigrated, let's say there was a film coming out in 2021 that mocked and denigrated black people. It called them dindus, it called them N-words, every single racial slur, right? And I'm not trying to call them these things derogatory, I'm just saying that this is what this film would be calling them. How would he feel about people who went out and protested that film? Would he have the same level of righteous indignation against them as he did against these evangelicals protesting the Martin Scorsese film, The Last Temptation of Christ? Now, I want to make something clear. There is something for picking your battles. Maybe this film wouldn't be very good. I haven't seen it. I've heard of it, but I haven't actually seen it. So maybe it would just be garbage, and so maybe it would have been better off if Christians at the time had just let it go. Now, I would say that what it should have revealed to Christians is how little control they actually had. Not here's their chance to get control, but it should have shown them how little control they actually had. That they were not as much of a cultural influence as they thought they were. That they were losing cultural influence. And so they should evaluate why. But anyway, the idea though of not liking a blasphemous film, a film that blasphemes your God, of not wanting a Hollywood studio to put that out, why is that so offensive to him? And again, would he be okay with a movie that came out and mocked and denigrated black people? And if he's not, and if he would, support the people protesting that film, why is his values that, it's wrong for them to put out a film that's going to denigrate and mock and use racial slurs against black people, but it's okay for the Hollywood to put out a film that's going to blaspheme God? Maybe he's consistent. Maybe he's like, no, they should put that film out. That should be allowed to go out too. And people shouldn't protest the film. And if he's consistent, well, then more power to him, right? I mean, again, we can at least have an honest conversation here, right? Because now we can talk about, okay, well, again, right, does he, is this really correct? Because I'll tell you the truth, I wouldn't be okay with a film that was going to come out and denigrate black people. I wouldn't want to see that come out. But at least then, like I said, we could ask that question. So maybe he's consistent, but I imagine he wouldn't appreciate that film. He wouldn't want that film to come out. I imagine that he would feel a little bit more strongly about how that film coming out, what that would mean for the country, as opposed to this film that is blasphemous, that I imagine was designed to be blasphemous, what it was doing and what it meant to do. And again, this is so often my problem with so many of these articles, is that I don't know, but I have a very, very strong feeling that when it comes to, if you take this same principle that they're espousing here, and you shift it a little bit by what's culturally acceptable or what's culturally unacceptable, they would be inconsistent. Because I've seen over and over and over again, and I'm not saying that Julie and Coleman are doing this here, but people who have said the same thing that they're saying, who've used any of these arguments, it's not about because they actually hold these convictions. It's because they want to go along with what the world says. They don't want to be those Christians. They want to be the cool Christians. Oh, I'm not like those Christians over there. I'm not like those Christians. I don't care if Hollywood makes a video that blasphemes God. See, I'm not like those Christians. And it's about, again, going along with the currents of the world rather than what you actually believe. Do they actually believe that Christians shouldn't engage politically? Big part of me. There's a lot of people who don't. Who say that. They'll say that because they don't actually want to defend what they truly think, which is, I don't like your conservative beliefs. I only like conservatism when it's ineffective. Just like Christianity. I don't like Christianity when it's in your mind. That's how a lot of these people seem to believe. When it has no real impact on the world, again, aside from the mercy ministries. You can, so they basically, they want Christians to kind of be sort of like doctors, right? You can heal the sick person, but don't you dare tell them how to be healthy. You can treat their bullet wound, but don't dare tell them that, hey, being in a gang like that is going to shorten his life. Don't tell them that. You can't say that. You can feed them, but nothing else. No other impact. And I've tried to exist within that space for a long time, and I don't see that biblically. Now, I think if that's all that a Christian wants to do, then that's fine, because there's nothing wrong with feeding people. There's nothing wrong with seeing to their immediate needs. There's nothing wrong with trying to take care of them. But I'm not going to sit here and say that that's all that there is to Christianity, because I don't believe it. I don't think that's what Scripture teaches. That's why I really have a big problem with this article, and it continues on from here. It's a rather long podcast here, but we're kind of going out of time. I've gone way over here. But the other way that sort of this whole thing, what bothers me about this whole approach, and how a lot of the people who talk like this, how they come off. I want to play a video now. This is from Michael over at Retro Blasting. He did this video back in May, actually. And he's describing, the title of it is the reality of ignore it and doing nothing. And the way that he describes, the picture that he's going to present here, this is sort of this is in many ways how I feel about a lot of people who are trying to take this position, right, where it's like, don't get involved politically. So let me play this here. Actually, I'm gonna pause my mic real quick, and then I'm just gonna let Michael speak for a little bit. So again, this is from Retro Blasting. Michael there, so go check him out.
But let me just give you this picture, because if you've ever been in this situation where you've been the person trying to throw in your 2 cents, this is what it feels like, looks like. These are the optics of this scenario, okay? Let's say that I get into a conflict as a YouTube channel, or it's related to my YouTube channel, with somebody out there, all right, who is another channel, a blogger, a Twitter user with a lot of followers who's really obnoxious, whatever it is. But I'm the face of retroblasting in this conflict, and they're the face of whatever. And let's pretend that instead of it being online, let's pretend that it's a big grassy field in a medieval world, all right? It's a big grassy field with rolling hills, and we're in the dip between 2 big grassy hills that go on for, hundreds of yards in either direction, all right? And we're at the lowest point in the middle of these things. I'm coming to my point here. You're like, why is he setting this up? I promise you, I'm coming to my point. And we decide that, this conflict has escalated to the point where we're going to have it out in a sword fight, all right? We're just going to Ninja Gaiden this thing. We're just going to, have it out. Slap them with the glove, and the swords come out, and it's like, you've offended me, sir, or whatever, however you want to visualize it. Whatever sword, whatever era, it's a sword fight, all right? This is where it's gone to. And so we're fighting it out, just fighting it out down there in the bottom of this big, vast, grassy, emerald green valley of hills, rolling hills. Pretend it's the Highlands of Scotland or something. I don't know. And then way off in the distance, somebody is walking along the top of the crest of the hill off to my right. Way off. Like, you can only make out that it's a human being, and they're just walking. Maybe they got a walking stick, or something. And they're not involved in this at all. They're hundreds of yards away. There's no danger to them. There's no way that they could even be held party to this. They're not responsible. They're not involved in this at all. They're not a part of it. And they're walking along. And they see way down there, they see me and this other person fighting with these swords, just fighting. And this dude up here, who's way out of the way, just stops walking, turns, and starts yelling into the wind, because, there's a lot of wind at different elevations when you're on a grassy plain. There's a lot of wind, so they got to yell over the volume of the wind. And they're like, hey, you shouldn't be fighting. Hey, you should be bigger than this. Hey. They have no context for what's going on. They're not involved. But boy, they've stopped what they're doing to just start judging and shaming one of the parties involved in the conflict. They have no real idea why the other person and I are fighting. They just want to get their opinion out there. They don't want to get involved. They don't actually want to invest any time in it. But they don't want to keep walking either. That's what it looks like, and that's literally what it is. When somebody who this isn't affecting, because this sword fight, it's not affecting that guy. That guy can just keep hiking. He's got no stake in any of this. He can just keep going. He can choose to assist if he wants to, or come down closer or whatever. I wouldn't advise it. If you're a person that's not getting invested in this, if you're not part of the group of people that showed support by coming to this thing and being like, we got your back, Michael, or we got your back, Joe Rando 42 on the other side. If you're not part of that entourage and you're just showing up like, hey, the toasty, like if you're doing that, you don't need to be involved. Like, keep walking, hero. Don't even turn around. Like, and that's what I'm trying to get at with this stuff. is there's a lot of people who are just walking by hundreds of yards away on the internet now because it's no longer the analog world, and they just want to stop and be like, hey, I don't like you fighting. Who the hell are you? I don't care what you think. They love to talk about how it looks. Well, I just think this looks bad for you. Trust me, it also looks bad for you. When you do
Exactly the same. Obviously, he's talking about something a little bit different there. But that's very much how it looks and how it feels when people sort of write these articles. They don't want to get involved politically. They don't want to address what's actually going on. They don't want to, again, don't look like when the brought up the example of Donald Trump, you don't want to look into why is it that people are voting for Donald Trump. You don't want to address that context. You just want to say, it looks bad that you're voting for Donald Trump. Again, it's always shouting into the wind. And again, when that's what he said, want to shame one side of the conflict. And that sort of seems to be the way that it always is. And that's why I've got a problem with things like this. You don't want to be involved, don't be involved. So why are you getting involved just to say, you shouldn't be doing this? Again, it's not entirely the same. It's a little bit of a different situation. But in many, many ways, that is how it feels and that is how it looks. They don't want to be involved in this. They don't want to address both parties. But they sure as heck feel like they need to address one party on this. That's why I don't have a lot of time for articles like that. I've seen the result of where that leads. Now, I want to talk about here. Want to address because I've looked at a couple of the comments here. I want to address one here. Wolfwin says, crimes such as murder and theft have victims who are being violated. It's much more clear cut to outlaw them. You're right. They're not making that point in this article. They're taking that for granted. Why? By what standard is it clear cut? Oh, let's see. Because we're not supposed to bring our Bible into this, right? By what standard are you determining that they're victims? And fine, even if you don't want to take those obvious ones, we could find a little bit more, less obvious laws. Maybe some that maybe aren't as clear cut by current cultural trends. Is it just a free-for-all then? Is it just whatever goes? Majority rules? But like I said, they're not making that point. They're not. You've already been more nuanced and given more thought than they've put in the discussion there. Well, they just take it for granted. But we used to take for granted that what? Men were men, women were women. 2 + 2 = 4. All those things have been questioned. You can't do that anymore. It's not the same world as it was back in the 1990s or the 1980s. All these things that we used to take for granted, we can't take for granted anymore. So by what standard? Is murder wrong? Is theft wrong? And that's the point that I'm making, is that when they have these little discussions right here, and they don't bother to try to go into it, they don't bother to explain why it's different, they're just throwing this out here. It doesn't provide for it. Again, I'm not saying that I want there to be, blasphemy laws, or I'm not saying that, I want the government to do that. But why? It's not just because I don't want religion involved in politics. Yet that seems to be the principle that they're promoting. So we can agree on that same principle that, okay, we both don't think that there should be laws against, what you believe. But why we get to that position is very different based off of what they're saying. This just very shallow, we shouldn't mix religion and politics, doesn't work. Versus why we should actually not have laws that, again, say that you have to believe certain things. The theological framework for that. Recognizing that, being willing to pay certain cost for the benefits. This is where they want to talk about, you shouldn't compromise. Life is about what? Many ways. Choices. What are you going to have to pay for those choices? And what are you going to get out of those choices? To put it more simply, the first rule of politics is the juice worth the squeeze? But that's why I don't like these kind of articles here. That's why when this is sent to me, like I said, I almost didn't want to do it. Because that very shallow, it's so generalized, but it's talking about something to where you need to be a little bit more specific, but it's just so generalized, it's so simplified. It is just it's repulsive to me. Because the effect of people listening to that and abiding by that have been in large part for Christians to just back out of these spheres, which, guess what, has left a vacuum. And that's allowed people who have no Christian worldview, who do not have the same morals and values that many of us would uphold and cherish, to come into these. They think that, Christians are just after these things and just don't want to get these things no matter what. I'd like to introduce them to the way some of these people who have these positions of power, how they actually think and how they got there. That is what it really looks like to not care, where the ends always justify the means. They think they know what they're talking about. I mean, again, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt here and saying that they're maybe just naive. They think they know what it means when, these Christians, they just mean the ends justify the means. Because they're getting a little bit mean. Because they're being a little bit, brutish in their goal. It's just all about the means. How the ends justify the means. Apparently, they haven't seen the people who are willing to sleep with other people, willing to blackmail other people, willing to steal, willing to lie, willing to throw innocent people under the bus, willing to kill in some cases to get to the positions that they're in nowadays. They're willing to sell everybody out so they can get more money. Or they can get more power. Or they can grease the right wheels to get a better deal somewhere along the line. And they don't even have any kind of Christian worldview or church discipline or anything to tell them no. And that's where we've gotten. And that's why, like I said, I'm done listening to this whole, no, Christians just shouldn't be political. They shouldn't get involved. Done listening to that. Because, again, based off of what I was reading in this article, they don't know enough to really talk about this in a way that is worthwhile for me to listen to. Or they're just dishonest. They're just trying to stop any movements from a right being politically organized, or Christians, conservative Christians being politically organized. They're just trying to stop that. No, don't do that. No, you can't organize. You can't do that. Like I said, I'm not listening to that anymore. That doesn't mean that, like I said, I want to use the state to convert people to Christ. That's not what I'm talking about. But this idea that, well, Christians just shouldn't be involved in politics and that our religion shouldn't somehow inform our politics, I don't think that that's biblical. I don't think that that's true. That's what I'm hearing from this article. That seems to be what this article's saying. If they're not saying that, I'd just argue that it's yeah, I know it's not really an article, it's an interview, but then it's a poorly conducted interview. Are there wolves to be watched out for? Yes. And in that instance there, I'm thankful for Julie for pointing out the wolves, for doing the journalism and showing this. And I know that she gets frustrated because there are a number of Christians who say, well, you shouldn't talk about these things. Christians shouldn't talk about these things because you don't want to gossip. And no, of course you do. You should talk about these things. When you see someone who's a wolf or you see someone being a bully, you should bring that up. So, it would be great is if Julie would point out the wolves so we can recognize them as wolves. We can mark and avoid those people. And follow the people who actually do care about this, who aren't just the grifters, who aren't the wolves. But anyway, I think this has gone on for a pretty good long time, so hopefully you have enjoyed this. Like I said, this is going to be the last one of the year. So let me know what you think about this. What do you think about this interview here, and the intersection between Christianity and politics and conservatism? And again, I think that there's a lot of overlap between Christianity and conservatism. It's not one for one. Not every conservative position is necessarily a Christian position. There are some things, especially a conservatism, and I've talked about this before, that is more interested in preserving the status quo than it is actually promoting a particular worldview. That is something to where, at this point in time, Christianity has very little in common with. But there is another sense of conservatism that would have very much in common with biblical Christianity. And again, for an interview that's all about, is conservatism biblical? I kind of would have liked to have seen a little bit more Bible. But what do you guys think? Comment, let me know. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for those who have been watching so far. Hopefully we will have more viewers going into the new year. More content. Of course, you can join the Discord server where you can get your questions and put them out on there. I'm not very good at handling the Discord server, I'll be honest with y'all. But you can join it. So it's probably the worst Discord server that you can join. So there you go. If you want to be part of the worst Discord on Discord as far as organization, come and join that one. It'll be a badge of dishonor for you. But anyway, I hope that everyone has a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Until next time.